Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and that rumor mill keeps on churning. Sam Raimi, director of Spider-Man's 1, 2, and 3, plus the MCU's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, has long been rumored as a top pick to direct Avengers Secret Wars. Now, a little later, I'm going to be joined by Colton Ogburn and Tommy Bechtel to get their thoughts on what a Raimi Secret Wars could look like. But first, let's break down this report. So this all started with an article from Screen Geek sharing a quote from Raimi that he gave at WonderCon promoting his new movie, Boy Kills World. They say Raimi was asked about the possibility of returning to the director's chair for an MCU film such as Secret Wars, and this is what Raimi had to say. I love 90% of the Marvel heroes that I've read in the great Stan Lee Marvel Universe comic books. I would love to work with Marvel again. They haven't reasonably asked me to. I hope they had a good experience with me. They haven't asked me yet. I hope they do. So, a working director being interested in a big job like an Avengers movie isn't exactly breaking news. You can file it under duh in most cases. But Raimi is different. He is no up-and-comer. He's already done a lot. And he's reached a point in his career when he can be a little more choosy about what project he takes on at this chapter of his life. And I'm not so sure that an Avengers movie is the type of project that fits a Sam Raimi. Now, before I tell you what I mean by that, I want to remind you that we have merch that we designed ourselves on our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com. In honor of X-Men 97, we have this Xmas Club t-shirt, parody of the Breakfast Club, this X-Men Nighthawk designed by comic book artist Mark Spears. We have the MCU Savior shirt, the Can You Tell Me How to Get to the MCU Deadpool Wolverine parody shirt, Doug as Wolverine, and many, many more. Guys, shopping our merch store is the best way for you to directly support our channel. All the shirts are high quality. We're very proud of them. You can find links for the shirts down below. So Raimi has a very unique style, from his oversight of the story to the cinematography to the direction itself. Any Raimi directed film is very much a Raimi movie. You can usually tell immediately. Take Multiverse of Madness, for example. That movie felt like a Raimi movie, and that stems from the fact that Kevin Feige was surprisingly pretty hands-off with that movie compared to other MCU projects, and he allowed Raimi to do his thing. Personally, I would love to see Raimi step in and recreate this franchise from his own voice. Like with Multiverse of Madness, he had a lot of factors to deal with that he wasn't used to. He had to cram in more characters in the script than he was used to. He had to balance out Disney Plus shows and movies and all this other stuff. And honestly, I think with more planning involved and with more like direct connection to the Disney Plus universe, I really think Raimi can knock this out of the park and make the best Avengers film we've ever seen. My only hope is that if he were to take on the job, I would want him to become a multiverse saga expert. Multiverse of Madness felt a little disconnected from the events that came before, such as Wanda's whole entire arc in WandaVision. Raimi is on record as saying that he didn't even get to see all of WandaVision or read the scripts before doing Multiverse of Madness, and that he was only privy to some key story moments that would occur in the series, and boy does that show. If Raimi, or any other director for that matter, is going to step in to direct Secret Wars, we need that director to be the expert in all things multiverse saga so that they can deliver a cohesive story. So that's the basic outline of where we are. Raimi wants to direct Secret Wars, Kevin's not calling him. So I want to talk to Colton and Tommy. Tommy, you know, what do you think here? I outlined some reasons why some fans think that maybe Raimi shouldn't direct Secret Wars. I personally think he's a great director and would love to see him direct anything. Should he do this? Can he handle this kind of scale?
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who brought the original Spider-Man, the 2000 Spider-Man movie into the zeitgeist and into pop culture is equipped to handle something on this scale. I mean, I was right in the sweet spot of beginning my career in film and television when that movie came out. I was, starting to become a student, going to taking film classes, and it just blew my mind, the scale of what could be done on screen. We also had X-Men around the same time that similarly, I think, succeeded on a lot of levels. I think Sam Raimi is the perfect shepherd for the Secret Wars. For a lot of the reasons that you detail in this video that I don't want to necessarily rehash, but like just his ability to deal in different realms and make different realms kind of make sense to a viewer. I think there's few people as equipped at this point in 2024 to take on a monolithic saga like Secret Wars and make it successful.
But then again, like I was saying earlier, he's a guy who, you give him his own thing to do, he'll run with it. He even took Doctor Strange, and it's a very much a Raimi movie first and a Marvel movie second. And maybe Colton, like some fans think, that's not the right thing for a Secret Wars film. What do you think? Should Raimi do this?
Look, man, I have written many of videos on this channel talking about how much I adore Sam Raimi. He is one of my favorite directors. His first two Spider-Man films are not only two of my favorite superhero films, just two of my favorite films. I love Sam Raimi. Having said that, I love the idea of him participating more with Marvel Studios in the MCU. I'd love to see him do something like Spider-Man 4. I think he would be a great choice for something like the X-Men. I don't know that he's the right choice for a huge event culmination spectacle type movie like Avengers Secret Wars. I hate to, go back to the well on this, but I really do think that the safest choice might be the Russo brothers for a film like Secret Wars, especially with the current state of Marvel Studios.
They said that the only way they would come back was if they did Secret Wars. I have to think that if they're back, we're going to hear this year, because we have D23, SDCC, and NYCC, plus CinemaCon, which are going to be at this year. So if they're in, they're going to say so really soon. So is Dustin Daniel Cretton, is he totally out on this? So there's no director for either of these films now?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay, because they moved him over to do Wonder Man, and the Shang-Chi sequel, I think, is the latest news. So, Colton, just playing devil's advocate, right? Let's kind of go back a little bit and look at Multiverse of Madness and remember what happened there. The film was announced at SDCC years ago with Scott Derrickson returning, presumably C. Robert Cargill, I think it was going to write it as well, and then they stepped away. And just, you kind of got the feeling from Scott Derrickson's tweets, he was a good soldier about it, but he was a bitter good soldier. He gave the impression that there was Marvel was pushing him to put this character in and that character in. I think he probably struggled with how to fit in Wanda. Later on, it came out he wanted to do Nightmare as a villain. And we know that Raimi and Michael Waldron had the idea to take the script and say, no, let's actually make Wanda the villain in this movie instead of in a future Avengers movie. So it's interesting to hear these two things, that Scott Derrickson felt very constrained by Marvel, whereas Raimi was not only able to completely change it and make Wanda the villain, but he was able to do that and ignore WandaVision like we talked about earlier. So as far as creative constraints, Tommy, do you think that Marvel, given these signs, would limit Raimi, and could Raimi even work within those confines if they did, or do you think he'd get free rein?
I think the version of Sam Raimi, the director we have now, can work within those confines. I would find it very hard to believe that late 90s or even definitely 80s Sam Raimi, ushering in the Evil Dead franchise and what have you, would be able to play within a sandbox with such rigid borders. But I think he understands, and I think with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, he was able to insert enough Raimi-ness, quote unquote, into the movie and still playing with the characters established in the MCU. I don't see why he couldn't, and I don't see why he wouldn't want to. We see what happens when these directors take on these projects of this scale. The upside of it, you end up in a situation like James Gunn, who's now running DCU, right? Like this is, if Sam Raimi wants it, a launching board to someday, shepherd a universe. If he had the desires, who better for Universal to immediately scoop up after Secret Wars to finally correct their monster universe, right? Than Sam Raimi. Could you imagine Sam Raimi springboarding from this?
If he wanted to do a whole franchise, though, I'm not sure that he would want to move away from directing just films.
Sure.
And I think that's where it comes in. In that kind of situation, Raimi would be playing more of a Feige, or maybe even more so a James Gunn type role over at DC, I think, in a MonsterVerse type scenario. Yeah. Whereas with Marvel Studios, we have a Feige. Studio interference is important when it comes to a film like Avengers.
Well, guys, just devil's advocate here. Remember that in Phase 2, we also had a Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon kind of gave notes on a lot of Phase 2 things. He told James Gunn, hey, your draft, his redo of Nicole Perlman's draft of Guardians of the Galaxy, he said, hey, there's not enough James Gunn in this. And Gunn was set to kind of, rumor has it, be that person in the cosmic side of the MCU. But, Tommy, you mentioned Raimi and sandboxes, and that just got me thinking about the only time I remember Raimi buckling under pressure to include too many characters, and that was Spider-Man 3. Yes. So Spider-Man 3, famously, Avi Arad said, no, we want Venom in it because Venom sells toys, and he copped to that mistake years later. It was not the Spider-Man story that Raimi wanted to tell. It was a Frankenstein's monster. It seems like with Multiverse of Madness, he learned from that. You could still look at that movie, even disregarding how it, does Wanda dirty after her arc in WandaVision, and say, it's kind of messy. It gets a little messy in places. Colton, what about you? Did you think that Multiverse of Madness, truly worked as both an MCU film and a Sam Raimi film?
No, I really like Multiverse of Madness. I would watch it again, excitedly. But it is messy. It was a product of a time in phase, what was that, phase 4, where it just appeared like the right hand, didn't know what the left hand was doing. And I feel like Raimi was yet again kind of put in a situation, just like with Spider-Man 3, where he was having to juggle a lot of things that he wasn't creatively over. So as much as I liked Multiverse of Madness, I do fear that going into Secret Wars, you'd be dialing that same problem, up to 11. I feel like I prefer Raimi doing Spider-Man 4 or doing the X-Men or something where it's more of a controlled, type of area where he can oversee it. He's not having to bring in the works of all these other creators. But I will add, there is something poetic about this nostalgic moment we're having with like superheroes and bringing, back Tobey Maguire, bringing back Hugh Jackman. So it would be poetic to bring in Sam Raimi to direct Secret Wars. I mean, it's not like you can bring in Joss Whedon or Bryan Singer, so Sam Raimi might be the
or
choice
Brett
for that.
Ratner. Really, all the other
Yeah,
all the other chess pieces are off the board.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. They must be booked on other gigs. That's the only thing I can think. Kevin Spacey might be available to play Dr. Doom. Who knows?
Oh my God!
While we're at it, don't know why they fired Jonathan Majors. I don't get the news much here. I mostly just watch movies.
Oh God!
Tommy, along those same lines, I don't know. So we're talking about this big splashy crossover. The problem Marvel always has, like they had it with Multiverse of Madness, they definitely had this problem with Thor: Love and Thunder, is just going into production without a script. They learned the wrong lesson from Iron Man, where you can kind of improvise and make things up and then fix it in post.
Yeah.
I don't think they did that with Avengers Endgame. They had to have a concrete plan because they shot those two movies back to back. They obviously reworked some things like Hawk's transformation, things like that. You find out things aren't working. But those movies are structured, Endgame especially, so well that you can tell they had a plan, they had a script, and Marcus and McFeely had their shit together for it.
Yeah.
Looking at Secret Wars, do you kind of sense Marvel is going in this with a script, or do you think that all these myriad of changes with Kang and who's the villain and where do the X-Men fit in, or do you think it's another Boyabayas that we're looking at in this film? And how would Raimi fit within that?
I think that the recent film history has taught us that when things start to pull apart and crumble, like as you're saying so well, the heading into those movies with no script versus, I completely agree, Avengers Endgame clearly had a thought-out outline and scripting and story in place. I wouldn't be surprised to see them fully revert back to that. I mean, and I think, a lot of that is credit to the Russo brothers and Marcus and McFeely, kind of working really well together, right? Like they kind of were all simpatico in their designs for how this bird was going to land. I would not be shocked if the after kind of the mess of Ant-Man, unfortunately, how that ended up turning out, the couldn't have predicted mess of Jonathan Majors totally flaming out as Kang because of off-screen issues. It's like, well, I would believe now with the investment they have in making 2 additional Avengers films and kind of trying to right the ship, it's going to be probably pretty rigidly outlined. At least the story beats are going to be set in stone, and then maybe some of the more of the minutia and connective tissue can be manipulated. But I think they've got to have a set in stone beginning, middle, end at this point, and I think they've learned they can't. You can improvise when Robert Downey Jr. is your lead actor. Basically, is the lesson. You can improvise probably when Jim Carrey is your lead actor, and that's probably the list. End of list. So.
Hearing that, though, and hearing, okay, they're going to have a plan, they're going to have a structure, then you bring in Sam Raimi. Now, look, one thing they don't talk about in Hollywood is that directors can be hired to do a job. Like I online once, a friend of mine was like, look, when people were up in arms about Edgar Wright shooting a McDonald's commercial, somebody I know responded, I was once at a commercial shoot, a shampoo commercial that David Lynch directed, and he just directed the shampoo commercial. It's not a big deal for these guys to go in for a day and practice their craft within that genre. But given that, right, so look at Raimi. Look at how the first Spider-Man had really very few hallmarks of his previous career. Part 2 did have the chainsaw scene with Doc Ock, which was, like so Raimi all over. And I think that Multiverse of Madness had even more of that. Do you think that with Raimi on board, he would find those moments in a light touch kind of way, Colton? Or do you think that maybe like in Multiverse of Madness, it was unique because so much of that was already geared toward horror.
Well, I mean, he is the master of horror. So, yes, I do think, especially in a film like Secret Wars, there are definitely... I mean, we're talking about a pretty cataclysmic situation with the multiverse dying, universes dying, and, I mean, we're talking about one universe, like, team of heroes having to decide if they're essentially going to commit genocide on another universe in order to save their own. I mean, these are massive, like, decisions that are having to be made, and I would love to see that Raimi touch and the horrific feel that we could perhaps see with a universe dying. Maybe in Secret Wars we get to see a universe die. I know in Loki we got to see a little bit of what that looks like. I would love to see that through a Raimi lens, how horrific and, you know, just deep cut that type of scene could be, seeing a universe get annihilated. And I just wanted to add, you guys watching may have noticed my facial expression change. I think you two have begun to sway me a little bit on my thought about Raimi.
All right!
High five.
I adore him, and here's the thing. Joss Whedon was kind of Feige's right. Kevin Feige's not a director. And for a while, Joss Whedon was kind of his right-hand man on making the Avengers stuff work. And then it kind of became James Gunn. Now James Gunn's over at DC. I would be 100% on board if with Raimi directing Secret Wars, if that also meant Raimi is becoming kind of his right-hand man, his story overseer, his director, who's kind of not only doing Secret Wars, but helping to take the multiverse saga and construct it, you know, get it back on track and land this thing. That is something that I would be interested in. I'd like to see. I guess what I'm saying is if it's just Secret Wars, I don't know. But if it's an even bigger role, maybe like also an executive producer type role, that's something that I could get on board with.
Well, I kind of disagree there because I want Raimi to just focus on being Raimi. You know what I mean? Like I want that film to be everything it can be. And I like looking at the DCU right now, the only reason James Gunn is able to direct a movie and supervise this universe is because A, he has a producing partner, Peter Safran, and B, there's no other movies to supervise yet. If they were filming other things and TV shows and this stuff right now, then I don't think James Gunn would be able to divide his time like that, and then we wouldn't get full Gunn on Superman Legacy. But you know, we're talking like we're throwing these theories out there. We assume that we know what's going to happen in Avengers X Dynasty, maybe, and Avengers Secret Wars, which is it'll follow the template of the comics, and the universe is going to end. We're going to have Battle World. There's no guarantee there. We don't know what's going to happen. Let's just put on, Tommy, let's put on our theory caps for a second and think, okay, Sam Raimi is able to come in. He's working with Michael Waldron, who is writing Secret Wars. I think they also moved him over to write whatever Kang Dynasty is now after Jeff Loveness was shown the door. Unfairly, I think. And then, of course, I didn't read Jeff Loveness's draft, so maybe not unfairly. Who knows? So then you have Sam Raimi stepping in. He's excited. He gets to work with Michael Waldron. They collaborated. You know, that seemed like they really liked each other on Multiverse of Madness. So now, what is Raimi? How do you think he would change this story, Tommy? Is he going to keep with the universe eradication thing? Is he going to be like, no, Toby? Toby's our main character now, and he's going to team up with Wolverine. What would you look for him to bring this, apart from absolutely no Venom?
Well, he just has a no Venom clause in all of his contracts.
I bet he does.
But he does have an Eminem must write a song for the movie clause.
Oh man! So he's caught. Hard place in wrong.
That's right. Between an Eminem and a Mars bar. But I think that I think, you know, I look at Civil War as a good example for how the MCU handled a comic book title. And they kind of just took the name and spirit of that and, you know, removed all of the other extracurricular players and just had their existing Avengers characters. So I'm wondering if the scope of this isn't going to be as huge as, you know, as fans have speculated, and we've kind of been led to believe that this is going to be the culmination of all of these studios' characters meeting on the grounds of Battleworld. And I wonder if it maybe will be more of a greatest hits kind of compilation, and also potentially the return of some classic, i.e. 8 years old, or, you know, haven't been on screen in 8 years, Avengers characters. I would be disappointed by that personally, but I do wonder if maybe what part of the assignment is kind of not trimming the fat, but trimming the excess. Like maybe it isn't a cast of 1,000, maybe it is more of a micro version of the story with the stakes still being universal destruction. But maybe like, as you said, main characters like Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and what have you, rather than all of the X-Men. Every Spider-Man villain, all the X-Men villains, all the Daredevil, Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Daredevil, the way they're like, anyone's on the board. I have a feeling the Deadpool movie may do some of that fat trimming for
right.
Secret Wars. It may act as a bit of a defense, a security fence for Secret Wars, and some people may get caught in the fence and not make it to the film.
I think that Raimi demonstrated already. When you watch Multiverse of Madness, which look, I don't care. You can say what you want about how it did Wanda, everything. The movie had a zombie Doctor Strange giving an inspirational talk to America Chavez. As somebody who's been reading comic books for my entire life, I still look back and go, what a time to be alive. I would never would have thought we'd get that moment. We're into the stuff we get now. So we're always like nitpicking stuff, but I want to just reiterate, I'm a happy guy about all this. I think you're right. It may not be as big of a scale, or it'll be even bigger than we think. And maybe it'll be like in Secret Wars, they had the main issues, but then we had like an Old Man Logan, see what he's off doing. And maybe we'll get those shows on Disney Plus. And instead of being like back to back, we'll set up Battle World, and then like we'll have a bunch of series that kind of set up the next thing. Colton, you're right though. It does need to feel cohesive and tie together, which is why, Tommy, I think that, maybe Raimi will also gleefully kill off characters who haven't been well received. But I kind of think there's so much on this. They have to include all these characters. We have to see She-Hulk meet Shang-Chi. It has to mean something. Yeah. It has to matter. Colton, what about you? Do you think Raimi's going to opt for, theoretical Raimi would opt for a smaller scale, like Tommy's saying?
Well, I think whether it's Raimi or not, I think an essential thing to making Secret Wars work is you cannot go too big with it. I think there comes a point, and I know we've talked about this since Age of Ultron. We thought that bringing in Wanda and Vision might be too many Avengers, and we were wrong about that. But I really do think you reach a point where if you have like 50 different characters running around, it becomes too much. I mean, we know how storytelling works, and I think if you reach that point, that becomes a very difficult story to tell in a 2 to 3 hour span. I kind of hope that, unlike with the 2015 Secret Wars, which they are definitely borrowing from heavily with the multiverse stuff, there was something more intimate about the original Secret Wars comics. I forget what year was that, like 84 that those original comics came out?
Is that the Claremont ones?
No, it wasn't Claremont. That was Tom DeFalco wrote it because he was the editor of Marvel Comics and he didn't want to put that much work on somebody else. So I forget who drew it, but it was 84, 85.
There was this like secluded feel to those comics where they were stranded, that where they were felt empty, and there were just your few core characters. I almost wonder if Secret Wars would be better served by bringing in a lot of classic characters, some of the new characters, telling that story in a more intimate, character-driven way, which is what Raimi is good at, and maybe save the She-Hulk meeting Shang-Chi and the stuff that they've built up throughout the multiverse saga, maybe save that for after Secret Wars, when I think we'll see kind of somewhat of an MCU reboot. Maybe let Secret Wars be kind of a bookend to these original characters, and don't try to shove too much in there. And I think with Raimi being, especially with what we've seen with his Spider-Man films, he's a character director. He cares about overall theme and the meaning of a story, and what that story means for those characters. I think that he would be driven to make even a large film like Secret Wars a more intimate story, a more concise story. So that's my hope.
Here's the thing, guys, and that's a very great thought, and I love the idea that 84 Secret Wars would be the inspiration, because it's actually just, this isn't nostalgia talking, it's a better comic book than 2015 Secret Wars. It's got more classic moments, it's got better character development, there's little things in there like how the X-Men and Magneto kind of went off and did their own thing. It's a very great comic that really, for the era especially, is kind of above, it sits above the fold of a lot of other stuff Marvel was putting out at the time. But when we talk about these crossovers, the reason Endgame and Infinity War worked so well is because there were, like you said, Colton, character stakes. We cared about the characters. We'd been with them for a few films. It's almost like DC looked at, or it's almost like Marvel looked at the DCEU and said, yeah, do that. And they just like movie, team up, you know, and they're not doing the big franchise buildup. So who in Secret Wars, who's your people, right? In the Endgame and everything are big three, the first three people to fight Thanos, or Iron Man, Captain America, Thor. Those are your big three franchises, right? With the idea that Spider-Man, Black Panther, whatever, we're going to come later. Tommy, who's your three of the multiverse saga? Who's your three guys or three women who are going to face off?
I mean, I think the natural ending of Guardians 3 saying Star-Lord will return probably implies that maybe we get a Peter Quill. I would say at this point, it's tough to say, right? Like I gotta believe that they're setting up Captain America Sam Wilson, but I don't know if he's gonna get the same lineup as that. Spider-Man for sure. I believe there'll be a Spider-Man. I don't know which Spider-Man. I don't want to cop out on that, but I'm gonna say just for fun, I'm gonna say Peter Quill, Spider-Man, and let me get a third one. Who's my big three right now based on what we have going on? I say Doctor Strange.
That's a good one.
Doctor Strange, Spider-Man.
That's your other franchise that's left. Colton, what about you? Who's your big three?
Yeah.
I refuse to stick to your rule of three.
Go ahead.
I have
yeah,
six.
Six. I'm not saying like who are the Avengers. I mean like who are the characters we care about whose arcs are arriving in this. Doctor Strange is a great pick.
Well, it's important to remember this is the MCU, so I definitely want to include MCU-based characters. So yes, Doctor Strange is important. I think it's important to have Thor and Hulk. Those are our OG, remaining Avengers from the MCU. Also, it's important probably to include some new blood, maybe have like a Miss Marvel type character there. But the two guys that I have to have in this movie, Hugh Jackman Wolverine, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. I'd even like to see Deadpool in there. And, I hesitate to have too many of these non-MCU type characters, but I think it's important to remember, I don't think Secret Wars is going to be like how Endgame was the end of the Infinity Saga. I think Secret Wars has the potential to be the end to this Marvel story that started back in the 90s, like with Blade. Like, I think we are seeing the culmination of an era of superhero movies. So I think it's important that a character like Hugh Jackman.
I think he'll be in it.
I got a little chill down my spine.
I think he'll be in it. I think Deadpool will be in it. I don't necessarily think they will be the main point of view characters on the quest or the journey. I kind of think like Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Kamala Khan. I think Kamala Khan for me is like of the new characters introduced. She's really the standout. Maybe because we've got to see her do more than we have like Shang-Chi, who has a lot of potential that. Where's my Shang-Chi sequel? Well, guys, thanks very much for joining me. Now I'm going to tell you what I actually think about Raimi directing Secret Wars. So now I'm going to talk about why Raimi would be a perfect choice for an Avengers Secret War film, and he's the guy that I hope they hire. Raimi has directed films like Evil Dead and Drag Me to Hell. And if Avengers Secret Wars is going to have something like the death of the multiverse and our key heroes being discarded in a place like Battleworld or The Void, Sam Raimi would be the perfect director to illustrate how horrific that could be. Raimi is also a phenomenal character director. He sees beyond the tight suit and cape and really does a deep dive into the character, tying their struggles to our own, and he uses the superhero genre as a mere tool to tell exaggerated versions of classic story tropes that have been around for centuries. Sam Raimi could be the perfect director to really drive home the moral quandary that I think our characters will be facing come Secret Wars, and the decisions they'll have to make regarding their own realities. Raimi could also be the perfect choice to finally drive home the deeper meaning behind the multiverse saga, and painting a picture of what multiverse stories are supposed to be about. That being a feeling of great insignificance simultaneously melded with the feeling of one simple choice changing the storyline of an entire reality. Multiverse stories at their heart are about the characters and the choices that they make. They're about the journey the characters take to find themselves and their place in the world. And that's exactly what Raimi did brilliantly with his 3 Spider-Man films. Plus, if Tobey Maguire has a big role in Secret Wars, which I hope he does, it'd be great to see those two reunite.
Sam, I won't be spoken to in that manner.
You talking back to me?
Well, guys, those are just our thoughts. Big shout out to the writer of this video, Colton Ogburn. You can find his social links below. So guys, let us know what you think about Raimi directing Secret Wars down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.